Dan Bryan, take it away.
Thank you, Greg. I don't know how smart I can be. I'm a former regulator. I spent 6 years on the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission as a member and vice chair from 2014 to 2020. So I'm a recovering regulator. Before I was on the commission, I spent about 25 years as an energy industry lawyer. So I'm a recovering lawyer. And now I'm an energy industry consultant. And among my clients are the MREA, a number of other folks, and Connexus. So I was asked to come here today to talk about and give you an overview of what's referred to as 100% by 2040. It's the new law that was just enacted within the span of a month this year at the beginning of the legislative session. And, so what does that law do? Well, in a nutshell, it requires all electric retail sales in Minnesota to come from 100% carbon-free resources. So what does that mean for you as members of Connexus? It means when we look out ahead to 2040, every kilowatt hour Connexus delivers to you is going to have to come from a 100% carbon-free portfolio of generation resources. That's going to be quite some undertaking. Now, on the road to 2040, there are milestones that utilities have to hit. For consumer-owned utilities like Connexus, in 2030, their portfolio and their retail sales in Minnesota have to be 60% carbon-free. In 2035, every utility's portfolio will have to be 90% carbon-free. And by 2040, of course, 100% carbon-free. And you might wonder, how does this law in Minnesota fit within the broader context around the country? Well, I think that's interesting. If we go to the next slide, this law makes Minnesota the 10th state to mandate carbon-free electric generation by a certain date, and only the 8th state to mandate it for all utilities, including consumer-owned utilities like Connexus. And not only did Minnesota put us sort of in the top 10 or top 8 in that category, but they vaulted Minnesota over 5 of those 8 other states that mandate 100% carbon-free electricity, and put us in a tie with New York for the 3rd most aggressive mandate, requiring the 100% achievement to take place by 2040 rather than 2045 or 2050, as it is in most other states. The majority of states don't have any mandate or goal at all, as you can see here. Next slide. You'll note that the legislature did this, but as we gather here today, no one in the legislature or anywhere else knows exactly how utilities are going to achieve this 100% carbon-free electric delivery by 2040, or the milestones necessarily along the way. The good news is that the law has some flexibility built into it to help utilities achieve that marker in a way that's consistent with reliability and affordability. One is a provision that reduces that milestone in 2030 from 80%, which is the standard for the investor-owned utilities like Xcel, down to 60% for consumer-owned utilities like Connexus. Another provision allows utilities to use those renewable energy credits Greg referred to a moment ago as offsets to the kilowatt hours that a utility provides from carbon-emitting reliability resources like natural gas generation facilities. For example, if Connexus relies on natural gas generation for, let's say, 100 megawatt hours of retail sales in a year, Connexus can still comply with 100% mandate, even though that facility emits carbon, by purchasing 100 megawatt hours worth of renewable energy credits. That's how it works. There's another provision that allows partial credit for carbon reducing technologies, for example, carbon capture, or the use of hydrogen blended into gas. Those things can count towards your compliance with that 100% standard, or the 90% or the 60%. There are some questions that I get. I mean, that's an overview and a really quick overview of what we're talking about. But I get some questions, and they might be some questions on your minds right now. First of all, why was this law enacted in the first place? It was a DFL party priority intended to ensure and accelerate the decarbonization of Minnesota's electric sector. That's the blunt answer to that. Prior versions were proposed in previous legislative sessions and they failed because there wasn't the political alignment that there was after the last election in November. Another question I get, well, did cooperatives or did anybody push back? And well, cooperatives did. Cooperatives were among the few and the very few who pushed back. And it was really that pushback, and I was involved in this, that resulted in those flexibility provisions I mentioned earlier. A longer on-ramp for cooperative utilities, the use of renewable energy credits to facilitate compliance without compromising reliability, and that partial credit provision for carbon-free technologies like carbon capture. Another question is, well, could the law be repealed in future years? Well, unless Republicans take control of both chambers, I'll borrow a phrase from a friend of mine. He's a chair of the Mississippi Commission. The chances of that happening are slim, and slim's out of town. I always loved that line, but so I had to use it, and I finally got to use it after years. So another question I get is does the law pose a risk to reliability or affordability? In a word, yes, it does. The good news is that Connexus, GRE, co-ops generally are well down the road in decarbonizing their generation portfolios. That's the good news. Bad news is that compliance without compromising reliability or affordability is going to be very challenging. You might ask, well, so what's Connexus going to do to meet that challenge? As a former regulator, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm going to turn it over to somebody else, and Brian will answer that question. Brian?
All right. Hey, good afternoon. I'm Brian Burandt, Vice President of Power Supply and Business Development. I will be giving an overview of our plan to achieve these new carbon-free standards. As a caveat up front to put some at ease, we are making a commitment to you, our members, that we will not compromise grid reliability in the path to pursuing 100% carbon-free. Grid reliability will always remain paramount. For 2023, our power supply portfolio is 38% carbon-free. The wind in our portfolio reflects our legacy share of resource commitments made on our behalf while a member of Great River Energy. Connexus has 5 solar projects between 3 counties totaling 20 megawatts that are interconnected to our distribution grid. With these interconnections, all generation stays local. Nothing flows back onto the bulk transmission system, which helps the solar economics. In 2018, Connexus brought online 15 megawatts of battery storage, coupled with 2 of the solar projects I just referenced. For the previous 4 years, we have used the batteries to align the solar production with our monthly billing peaks. For 2023, we have registered these assets with MISO, the market organizer. We are using them to meet our market capacity obligations. By 2026, we project our energy supply to be 63% carbon-free with the addition of 3 new wind projects. There will be 2 projects in southern Minnesota and 1 in North Dakota. The Connexus participation in these projects is approximately 200 megawatts, which will be almost 35% of our energy supply. Moving forward, Connexus is well situated to grow our carbon-free portfolio. We have 100% flexibility in developing future resources. Our electrical size gives us economies of scale to develop utility-level solar projects with good economics. Our project development experience and partnerships will serve us well as we leverage them to pursue new resources to achieve Minnesota's carbon-free milestones. With our power supply contract, we are solely accountable for future resources and compliance with Minnesota's renewable energy and carbon-free standards. So we are in the process of developing a forecast for our next 10 years. In addition to the traditional inputs used in load forecasting, we are taking a deep dive into the adoption of electric vehicles and rooftop solar by our members. The growth of these 2 technologies will have a significant impact on our load forecast. In 10 years, we project our members could be charging as many as 30,000 electric vehicles. At this level, EVs would be 15% of our residential sales. In 10 years, we project that up to 8,000 members could have solar on their roofs. This would be 75 megawatts of daytime generation interconnected to the Connexus system. We are a 500 megawatt summer peaking utility that peaks in the late afternoon. Adding 75 megawatts of solar will definitely change our load profile. So given these adoption estimates for electric vehicles and rooftop solar, you can understand why Connexus is doing a deep dive to account for their impacts. We are expecting to complete a resource plan this fall with a presentation to the Connexus board in November for their approval. With Minnesota's new legislation, we know that all our future energy resources will be carbon-free. We will continue to add solar interconnected with our distribution system in niche locations. In addition to the 200 megawatts of wind being added to our portfolio in 2026, even more will be necessary to meet our growth and the carbon-free standards. Our resource plan will consider all carbon-free resources while incorporating the economics of both supply and demand side resources and developing our preferred plan. Again, as a commitment to our members, we will never compromise grid reliability in the path to pursuing 100% carbon-free.